Good evening, everybody. Special welcome to those of you that are joining me live, but I appreciate you may be listening to this as a recording. So I'm glad that you've made the time to do that as well. Really great to have so many people in the class with me this evening. And yeah, very excited about what the evening has in store. We are here to have a look at some principles of costing. And in this evening's session, we're going to be covering tasks numbers 1 and 2 from the Principles of Costing unit. And we're going to be looking at this from the set of First Intuition revision questions, which hopefully you have access to. My name is Anne. If you haven't come across me before, I'm one of the tutors here at First Intuition. I teach a variety of things, including some financial accounting and some management accounting units. And yeah, I have a great love for this particular unit, Principles of Costing. So I'm thrilled to be able to take these revision sessions for you. So this evening, as I said, then task number 1, we're going to look at classification and relationship of costs. And task 2, we're going to have a look at costing techniques. So without further ado, I'm going to open up the set of revision questions. If you are an FI student, they are mock number 1. And just a note there, the mark allocation, just useful to have a look at that perhaps since we are just scooting past it. But you can see that this exam is going to be made up of 80 marks in total. Get 1.5 hours to answer the questions, making up those 80 marks. Just get my highlighter here. There we are. 80 marks available, 1 hour and 30 minutes to complete that. And we're looking at task number 1 and 2 this evening. So 8 marks and 10 marks respectively. So that's going to be our focus for this evening. So I'm going to be with you today. I'll be with you for the next session as well. I'm taking a break from work. I've got a birthday next week, quite exciting. So somebody else will cover for me on Tuesday. Then I'll be back with you on Thursday after my birthday spoils, just to pick up with the last evening. But we will be able to get through this entire mock during our sessions, and I expect in the last evening we'll probably have time to do something else as well. Now, anybody who is not a student of First Intuition, you might be interested to see here in our revision question pack or our mock bank, for each task we tell you firstly what it's about. So this one is about the classification and relationship of costs. We tell you how many marks it's worth. This one is worth 8. We tell you how long you've got to complete it in the assessment. But not only that, we then say, well, if you're a little bit rusty on the area of classification and relationship of costs, don't worry, because here's a task briefing. So what we then do is put together a set of revision notes, if you like. So an abbreviated set of the First Intuition notes, covering the areas that are likely to be tested within task number 1. So we're not going to look at all of that because I think it's going to spoil our questions. But if you do need to do a little bit of revision, pick up on that task briefing, particularly if you're not a student of FI, you might benefit from having another perspective on this. So have a run through the task briefing. It will run through the difference between financial accounting and management accounting here. It will look at different types of business organisation and industry. It will look at some of the functions of managers, from planning to control to decision making, as well as finding the cost of things. And then it will look at all the different ways in which costs can be classified. So a nice long list of revision points here, classifying costs by function, by nature, by element, by behaviour, and so on. So some lovely revision notes in there for you to have a look at. And particularly if you find this task difficult, then you certainly might want to go back to those revision notes for a little bit of extra help. I thought that because you've got me to help you this evening, we could actually launch straight in with a task. So that's exactly what we're going to do. Launching straight in here with task number 1. So in task number 1 here, Eleanor works in the accounts department of a textile company. So textiles just meaning clothing, fabrics, that sort of thing. And Eleanor has been given some reports in relation to the business. We've got to identify which type of report Eleanor is looking at. So Eleanor's first report, report number 1, deals with historical information. Eleanor's second report deals with forecasts for internal users. And I've got two headings. I've got financial and I've got management information. Oh, I can see some answer in the chat box already. Lovely. So report number 1 then, historical information. I see that we're going with financial for that one. Number 1 is financial. Yes, I absolutely agree. And if you've been in my class before, you might remember my analogy about 2 accountants in a car, which sounds like it's going to be a joke and really isn't. But my financial accountant sits on the back seat and looks out with the rear window and just looks at where we've come from. Produces lots of great information about what has happened in the past. So financial accounts are very much concerned with what has gone before, this historical information, and they're used very commonly by external users. We send these financial accounts to our shareholders so they can see how well the company did. We send them to Companies House to make them a public document so the world at large can see how well we're doing. We send them to HMRC if they need them. And we certainly use them to calculate our tax liability. So they have lots of external users. The management accountant is the one in the front seat, in charge of the steering wheel, telling us where we're going, avoiding the potholes, making sure that we don't get rammed off the road by competitors, making sure that we reach our destination. So management information is very much about looking forwards, which is why this report would deal with forecasts. Forecasts are going to be predictions, expectations of what we're going to be doing over the next period, and often used for internal use. So well done, those of you in the chat box who knew that, who remembered that. Excellent work. If you do have any questions as we go along, of course, do please pop them in the chat box. I will keep an eye on that as the lesson progresses. Now, within report number 2, which is the management report, Eleanor looked closer at the breakdown of costs of making of one product. So this particular product has different types of cost, different elements. And these elements are going to have to be classified as either fixed, variable, or semi-variable. Now, who can remind me, if a cost is fixed, what does that actually mean? What does the term fixed cost mean to you? Stays the same. Absolutely. I think we might have talked about a wedding. And we might have said, if we're having a wedding, it doesn't matter whether I invite 10 people, 20 people, or 50 people, certain costs will be the same. The wedding dress, the wedding rings, the wedding suit. Mustn't forget the fact there's going to be a husband at the wedding too. So these costs stay the same. It doesn't matter how many guests come, these costs do not change. So in terms of the cost for Eleanor and the textile business, these are costs that will stay the same irrespective of how many units the factory makes. Excellent. So they stay the same. What about variable costs? Do you remember those? Variable costs are costs that will increase. So costs that will go up when I make more. An example I often use if we're talking about a wedding analogy would be the food. If I invite 10 people, then the hotel charges me for 10 guests worth of food. If I double that to 20 guests, I have to pay twice as much for the food because I'm feeding twice as many people. So the variable cost, although the cost per guest will be the same, so maybe it's £40 per head, that's what I pay for each person's plate of food, fair enough. But if I double the number of guests, I double the total cost that I have to pay. So variable cost is actually, it's the same for each particular person or each particular unit, but the more units I do, the more I pay. So my variable cost in total increases when I do more. Well remembered. And then the semi-variable cost. Remember that one? Little bit of both. So if the fixed and the variable cost are added together, my semi-variable cost is a bit of both. It's a cost that has a part of it that stays the same whatever happens, and then a part of it that actually increases when we do more. So it's like the fixed one and the variable one added together. So now we've revised those three terms, should we look at these costs on the left here and see if we can identify what sort of cost we think they are? So it's a textile factory. Let's imagine we make tracksuits, just as an example. So let's say we make tracksuits. Do you think the salary of the managing director's personal assistant is going to change if we got an order for another 10 tracksuits? Probably not. So I would agree with you that that cost is fixed. It is staying the same irrespective of how many tracksuits are produced in the factory. The salary will not change. And because it won't change, it is a fixed cost. It stays the same irrespective of how many units are produced. Well done. Wages of the production staff, and they're paid on a piecework basis. We should have seen that term before. They are variable costs. Let's imagine we pay our staff, well, how much would we pay them for a tracksuit? Let's say we pay them £4 per tracksuit. Maybe that's a bit generous, but we'll give them £4 per tracksuit. Piecework. So they make one, they get £4. They make 10, they get £40. So you can see that as the number of tracksuits produced increases, so does the pay of the production staff. So it's variable. It's a constant amount per tracksuit, but the more tracksuits are produced, the more the total cost becomes. Excellent. What about the fabric that I use in the production? Absolutely, Charlie. Charlie's just asking, are we assuming that there's no sort of minimum wage going on? Yes, because it's not mentioned. I'm assuming we're not breached any minimum wage regulations here, and they are literally paid on a piecework basis. I never assume anything beyond what the question tells me, but very good question, Charlie. So we're assuming just the piecework there. No problem. And the fabric then? The fabric used in the production? You're going with a variable. Excellent. Let's say we need 2 meters of fabric to make a tracksuit. So if I make 10 tracksuits, 20 meters. Make an extra one, I need 22 meters, and so on. So it is variable. The fabric will cost the same per meter. Each tracksuit will cost the same in terms of fabric, but the more tracksuits I make, the more I spend. So it's variable. Lease of the factory sewing machines. That's an interesting one, isn't it? A lease. Do you think that the leasing company are going to charge us more for a sewing machine if I use it more? They're not, are they? It's going to stay the same. Don't know if anybody has a car, maybe on hire purchase. It's a very similar idea. You buy your cost on finance. Does the car company charge you more because you drive more? No. Do they charge you less because you didn't go very far during COVID? No. So the lease of the factory sewing machine is fixed. You will pay the same lease payments irrespective of how many hours you spend sewing. Well done. We're moving into a couple of more interesting ones perhaps here then, because the next one is a maintenance contract of the sewing machine. How does that maintenance charge get agreed on? It is a set fee. So maybe, I don't know, £100 plus an extra amount per 100 hours of use. So it's basically a set fee plus additional amounts for every 100 hours that it's used. Exactly right. We're not asked to do any calculations here, so there are no numbers really, other than the fact that we pay a little bit more for every 100 hours of use, but that is semi-variable. You are quite right. It has the fixed element, the set fee, but then we also pay more when we use it. Excellent. So it's a little bit of both, semi-variable or mixed cost. And then the last one I think is an interesting one. I often use this as an example when I'm teaching this in the first instance, but wages of sales staff, they get a basic salary. So they get paid a certain amount, a bit like a car salesman, sales staff often sort of have this sort of payment structure, a basic salary, and then they get commission for every unit sold. What do you think about that one? They've got a set salary, a basic salary, then they get commission on top of that one. It's a semi-variable one, isn't it? Yeah, this one is actually semi-variable as well. So you're quite right if you spotted the variable element because you spotted the commission there. But what we're saying, for example, is that we pay them a basic salary of, let me say, £1,000. Then let's say we pay them £10 per item sold. So basic of 1,000 plus £10 per unit sold. So if I worked at this company and I managed to sell 5 units, I could have a basic of 1,000 and I could accumulate an extra £50 in commission. And maybe my friend, who works far harder than me, managed just to sell 15 units, so therefore gets even more money than I do. So we've got the fixed part, stays the same always, and then the commission, which is driven by the number of units that we actually sell. So it has a fixed element, it has a variable element as well. So that one was semi-variable. How does that seem? Any questions on that? Any of those that are not clear for you? Okay, well, remember, we're just looking at one mock here. You should go back to your study materials. If you are with First Intuition, you have got various task number 1s to work through in your task bank, as well as mock 2 to have a look at as well. If you're not an FI student, then go back to the materials provided by your training provider and have a practice ask some other mock 1s from their material, some task 1s from their material. So if you found any of that difficult, maybe start by going through the task briefing. Just remind yourself what all the different subject areas are and how we do categorize all these costs in all these different ways. That would be useful to do. Revise all of that and then just keep practicing tasks of this nature till you start to feel a little bit more confident with them. Okay. So we're going to go to task number 2 next then. The plan was to have a look at a couple of tasks this evening. So task number 2 starts off in exactly the same way. Tells you how many marks it is, how long we get to do it, runs through the task briefing, some excellent revision notes there for you as well. If you find the task quite tricky, you may want to review those revision notes at some stage. Right. So here is an example task for us to practice. And our company is called Serenity Limited, like what they've done there. Serenity makes a single product. Okay, so they make a single product. A production level of 7,500 units has the following costs. I'm going to guess from their name that maybe they sew things. I'm going to pretend that they make teddy bears. Let's imagine they produce teddy bears. It's a single product. And they're producing 7,500 teddy bears in this particular period. That's going to involve some material. So they need 2,000 meters of fabric. It costs £12.50 for every meter. They need 4,500 hours of labour, which they pay £10 per hour. And then they incur £300,000 of overheads as well. So there's 3 different categories of cost here: the material, the labour, and then the overhead. What does the question want? Well, the question wants us to complete a table to show the total cost per unit. That means the total cost of one teddy bear, assuming that we produce 7,500 units in the period. Remember that these costs were for 7,500 units. So it's saying, okay, so then you're producing 7,500. Tell me what the cost would be for 1 unit. It tells me that I must absorb, love that word, absorb the overheads over the number of units produced, and my answer must be to 2 decimal places. So we'll come back to that word absorb shortly. Now what we're producing here is effectively a cost card. It's not what they've called it, they've just headed up the column unit production cost, but it is effectively a cost card. A cost card starts its life as a blank piece of paper, and we gather together the cost of making 1 unit, and that's exactly what's happening here. Now, can you start off, can you tell me how much are we spending on materials? How much is this company spending on material in total? Can you work that out for me? £25,000. Good. Okay. So what you did there is you said, well, they're buying 2,000 meters of fabric, and I can see that they're paying £12.50 for each meter. So I am quite confident they're spending £25,000 on material. And how many teddy bears are they making with that £25,000 of material? 7,500 of them. So the next question then is, how much are they spending per teddy bear? What is the cost per unit? Remember, that's what the question wanted, cost per unit. If you find that you're always multiplying when you're meant to be dividing, or dividing when you're meant to be multiplying, think of that word per as being a division sign. So cost per unit becomes cost divided by units. So £25,000 shared over 7,500 units of teddy bear. Let's find out how much it costs to make each one, rounded to 2 decimal places. £3.33? I agree. There we go. £3.33. Well done. And then should we do the same thing for labour? How much do I spend on labour in total? Remember, labour is my payroll, my people, my staff. Lovely. Yep. So 4,500 hours have been worked. Each hour has been paid at £10. So my payroll bill is £45,000. So I can work that out to start with. Find the cost. And then I can say, well, that was the cost of making 7,500 teddy bears. So if I'm trying to find the cost of 1 teddy bear, the cost per unit, if I then divide that by the 7,500 units that I've produced, it will give me the cost of 1. So £6. Yes, well done. I agree. Now, does anybody remember the phrase direct cost? Direct cost is a phrase that we use for costs that change when I produce more units, costs that are directly attributable to my units. So we're saying here, if we get an order for twice as many teddy bears, I'm going to have to work twice as many hours. If I get an order for twice as many teddy bears, I'm going to have to buy twice as much material. So these costs are going to change when I produce more units. These are costs that directly relate to the production of the teddy bear. So these subtotaled here are the direct cost. So a direct cost is sometimes referred to as a cost that is traced or traceable to an individual unit of production. So if somebody was going to come along and say, how much material do you need for 1 teddy bear? I could tell them. If they said, how long does it take you to make 1 teddy bear? I could tell them. These are costs that I can trace specifically to the units I'm producing. And then the next one is the overheads. The overheads are £300,000 altogether, And the question did actually tell me to absorb. Do you remember that word? Absorb. It's going to be to share my overhead over, it told me specifically to share it over the number of units of production. Oh, I'm getting an answer in the box already. Lovely. What I did want to do with the overheads was just remind you about my lovely OAR, the overhead absorption rate, because you say, well, I know what the overhead is. I know that I spend £300,000 on overheads, maybe things like rent, salary of the supervisors, could be anything, couldn't it? The rates of the building, the insurance of the factory, any of those things. And I need to share those costs over the number of units, because the question said absorb it based on the number of units. So let me actually strictly write here, should be overhead divided by the activity. It just so happens that the activity in this particular scenario, it told me to use units. So the activity in this case is units. Units is the number of teddy bears I'm making, which, as you know, is 7,500. So I've got £300,000 shared over 7,500 teddy bears. As you correctly said, that would be £40 per teddy bear, bringing me a total cost of manufacture of £49.33. So quite a lot of overhead there. £9.33 of direct costs and another 40 of overheads, so £49.33 altogether. Is everybody happy with that? Does everybody remember that OAR formula? Remember to learn that one if you haven't already. Very important formula to help us share the cost of the overhead for the period over the things that are happening in the period. And it told us quite clearly here to use units produced as the basis. That's what I've done. My answers are to 2 decimal places. That's part A complete. Now, I think part B of this question then steps up a little bit in difficulty, but once you've tried it once or twice, it will start to feel a bit more familiar. So, same company then, Serenity, are considering what the product costs would be if they used an alternative overhead absorption method to units. So they're saying, instead of putting units in there, I should choose a different activity. Okay, well, they're considering it. Let's read on. First question, the current method of overhead absorption rate that's being used is based on, and there's my pick list. What is the current basis? Yeah, was that, wasn't it? It was, thank you. It was the number of units or the unit rate. I was calculating the overhead absorption rate by taking the overhead and dividing it by the number of units, because that's what the question said I must do. So number of units. Now, next one, a little bit more tricky. An appropriate alternative basis for this company would be, well, there's only 3 options at this level. You can absorb based on units, you can absorb based on labour hours, or you can absorb based on machine hours. Looking at the data in this question, if you're not going to use units, what you might use instead? Yes, Michelle has chosen labour hours. Thank you, Alison. Also choosing labour hours. And why is that? Because that's the only other information I've got. It makes it look like there aren't any machines in this factory. It makes it look like we sew these teddy bears by hand. There's no mention of any machines. The only other thing I've got to work with are these labour hours. So because I've got labour hours given, that would seem like a useful alternative. And that is one of my choices. I can use labour hours. They didn't even give me machine hours as an option. They did give me material costs, but I'm not going to be using that. That's not one of the methods that we've seen. So we'll choose labour hours. Good. This would mean that overheads would be divided by, and this is going to be a number. So my overhead absorption rate, what would it look like? Well, it would still be the overhead, and it would still be divided by the activity. The difference is when I take my overhead of 300,000, I wouldn't divide it by the number of units anymore. Thank you. I would divide it by the number of labour hours. Absolutely right. So those labour hours, 4,500 of them, I would divide by 4,500. Labour hours. And that answer would give me an amount of overhead for each labour hour. So overhead divided by hours, because I've written the working down, I'm just going to make a little note of what that would actually be. Come back to that in a moment. But it would mean the overheads have been divided by 4,500, as you said. That was another point from my pick list. So that's that one ticked off. Then it says this would result in the overhead cost per unit doing what? Okay, yep, we're going with increasing. Very good. So this results in the overhead cost increasing. Okay, how do we feel about that task then so far? Good? Happy? Excellent. Does anybody have any questions on that? Is there anything I can help anybody with? If there is anything that you're unsure about, now's a great opportunity. Of course, you can spend some extra time on this. You can certainly have a look through some similar tasks that you might have come across. As I said, with your own training provider, if you're not with First Intuition, if you are with us, then by all means look at some other tasks from our materials. But I think that that's quite a nice sort of introduction to this question. And yes, the exam questions will be in this format, Ryan, absolutely. What we do is we produce our task bank and our mocks based on the format of the live assessment. So yes, if you actually, that might be a good thing to do once this lesson is finished, perhaps before I see you again on Thursday, if you get a chance, to actually go and have a look at the AAT sample assessment. Don't mind which, number 1 or number 2, actually pull up that AAT sample assessment from the AAT website and have a go at task 1, have a go at task 2 and see how they look and how they compare to what I have shown you here. That might be a nice thing to do. Okay. No other questions on that? Well, we have actually got a little bit of time left. So I think, if you don't mind, then we might just fit in task number 3. Task number 3 is actually quite a short one. And then that will mean that we'll get a little bit of time later when we come to the end of the course, maybe to even have a look at an AAT assessment together. And yes, the task will always be in this order as well, Michelle. Yes, they will. Task 1 will always be about the same thing. Task 2 will always be about the same thing. Task 3 will always be about the same thing. The AAT gives advice in advance to tell us exactly what each task will cover, how many marks it will be, so we can work out how much time you should spend on it, and so on. So something that you can actually consider, and I wasn't really going to talk about it much yet, but maybe when we've had a look at all the tasks, we can think about it. It's the order in which you might wish to answer them. I think that task 1 particularly is quite a nice one. Task 2 is also quite nice. If there's tasks later where you know you find them more difficult, you might think, oh, I might want to leave the difficult ones till the end and get my nice ones out of the way. The ones I know I score well in, I'd like to get those done sooner. So we've got that to consider. Okay. Right, task number 3 then, just because it's not going to take us very long. Task number 3 is about recording costs. So this is largely about the coding of costs. It also does cover these different responsibility centres, which we'll recap on as we have a look at the task. And then we're going to code some different revenue and expense transactions. So if you find this task difficult, or you think it's been a little while since you've seen this area, at some point, please do revise the meaning of these different types of responsibility centre: cost, revenue, profit, and investment, and make sure you understand how we code transactions. But we are pretty much going to revise it as we work through this area here. Now, we have a pick list of 4 different types of responsibility centre. We have cost, we have investment, profit and revenue. I can tell you each one is only used once. And I would like us maybe to start with, I'm going to start with what I think are the easier couple. I'd like us to start with this one, the garment finishing section in the factory. So we make pajamas as an example, or tracksuits, whatever I said earlier. Say it was tracksuits. This is the finishing section. So this is making sure that all the little bits of threads of cotton are being cut off properly, the elastic's been put on, the zip's now added, everything is good, it's ready to go, finishing it, maybe even putting it in its little plastic bag before it gets sent out, putting the label in so everybody knows it's our brand. What sort of centre is that, do you think, looking at these? Exactly, yes, you're going with cost centre. So we're going to have a look at cost centre, and the reason we say cost centre is because it doesn't sell anything, does it? This garment section, the finishing bit, doesn't sell anything. So if it doesn't sell anything, it can't make any revenue. And if it doesn't make any revenue, it can't make any profit. And if it doesn't make any profit, then it can't make a return on its investment. So overall, the garment finishing section, I would say, is a cost centre. The factory retail outlet. That was a bit more tricky just because of the pick list that we're being given, because I could perhaps put that as one of 2. But what they're looking for here is this is now the factory retail outlet. So this is now where we sell the offcuts. So the bits that weren't great, we now sell them on to the public, like seconds perhaps. So it's a factory outlet. I would say, oh, why have I just ticked it? We should have given it its proper name. Sorry about that. That one should say cost centre. So this one, because this is now selling things, I would say is the revenue centre. Now, the reason I haven't gone with profit centre is because I don't think that this factory outlet gets any choice about what it buys. I don't think it has control over its costs. I don't think it can say, oh, no, we don't want to sell those tracksuits. They're not a great seller. It doesn't really have a choice. It's like the factory shop on the site, and these are the tracksuits that need to be sold, and therefore these are the tracksuits that go into the shop, and these are the things that we sell. So the manager of that shop is going to be judged on how much they can sell. So I'd have that one as a revenue centre. Excellent. Okay. And then the final one, the design and development department. This one, they were looking for investment centre. And the reason they were looking for investment centre there is because they're saying this is actually an area like research and development, design and development. This is the team that comes up with new designs. These are the people that are designing the stuff that is eventually going to be the next best thing. So these people are going to be assessed based on, in part, the amount that has been invested in there, because we see this like as an investment in the future. So we want to keep a track of what we've invested into this department, because eventually it's going to contribute towards the success of the business. So this one we're going to say is an investment centre. Remember, each one is only used once. Yes, I think development was quite helpful in that one too, wasn't it? Yeah, I agree. Good work. Okay. Next little bit then, just to finish off, the coding part. And these questions can vary, I think, a little bit in terms of difficulty. I think this one's quite a nice one, but you can see what you think. Serenity manufactures hoodies for children and for adults. Okay, so that's all they do. They make hoodies, some for children, some for adults. They use an alphanumeric coding structure, which means that their code number is going to be some letters and numbers mixed together. So alphanumeric. We've got some alphabetical elements to the code here, and then we've got some numbers over here. And it's based on 1 profit centre and 2 cost centres. Oh, that doesn't look right, does it? It must be 1 profit centre and 3 cost centres. I can see 3 there. So I think we've got 3 cost centres actually. Not that it's actually relevant to how we're going to answer the question, but we've got the sales department. So they do sell things. So we'd hope that they would make a profit. And we compare the sales with the cost price. And then we've got our cost centres here. Okay. So let's have a look what else we know. Each code has a subcode, so each transaction will be coded as a 6-character reference. Now, all that means is we're going to have to pick up first, is it the department where we sell the hoodies? If so, then it's a HOS. HO for the hoodie and S for the sale. Is it the department where we manufacture the hoodie, in which case it's HO for hoodie and then M for manufacturing, and so on. Once we've decided that, we just need to say, is it for a child or an adult? Is it a direct or an indirect cost? Let's see. So, online sale of children's hoodies. I think I've got an answer for that as well. So the fact it is a sale. The fact we are making a sale. HO for hoodie, S for sale. It's a sales department and it's a child's hoodie. So would you agree? 120. So HOS, 120. Does everybody agree with that one? Yep, lovely. Postage of an adult hoodie. Postage. Where's postage going to go? Which of these categories do you think postage would relate to? Distribution? I'd say postage is probably distribution. I'd say I'm going to be distributing a hoodie. So HOD for the distribution. Whether it's an adult hoodie or a child's hoodie, I guess, isn't really even that relevant. The fact it is postage of a hoodie. The question, is it direct or indirect? Would I know specifically how much postage I spend per hoodie posted? If the answer is yes, it's direct. If the answer is no, oh, that must be shared over many things, then it's an indirect cost. So you're going with the direct cost, and I completely agree. That is a direct cost because I can relate the postage to the hoodie. A hoodie costs this much to post. I can trace them together. Is that better, Zuzana? It's all about whether we can trace it. So if I said to you, Zuzana, just as an example, I'm going to post a hoodie. Would I know how much that cost? Could I tell you specifically the cost of posting one hoodie? If the answer is yes, it's direct. If the answer is no, the answer is it's indirect. So remember we talked about electricity. Could I tell you how much electricity relates to a hoodie? No. I can tell you how much electricity relates to the month, or how much electricity I spent in the day. Do I know how much was for each hoodie? No. So it's indirect. So direct means it can be traced. No problem. You can certainly pick up the recording. Salary of the accountant. Where do you think the accountant cost is going to go? HOA? Yep, I agree. It's a HOA. So the accountant is a HOA for the administration. And then is it direct or indirect? Yep, you're quite right. It is indirect, which means I don't know how much of that accountant's salary is for that hoodie. That's not how it works. The accountant never touches the hoodie. They don't get involved on that level. The direct costs tend to be associated specifically with individual units of production, making of them, in this case, posting them, but not the accountant's salary. They would be indirect. Well done. A repair of the sewing machine. So my sewing machine, what category here do you think I would choose? It's a repair, so it's not, I'm not selling anything, it's a cost. Yep, I'd go with the manufacturing because that's where the sewing machine lives. It doesn't live in the accounts office, nor does it live in distribution. The sewing machine would be found in the manufacturing office. So I would go with HOM. Could I allocate the cost of that repair to an individual hoodie? Nope. It doesn't relate to an individual hoodie. It just relates to production in general. So it's indirect. And then the last one, the purchase of the fabric to manufacture the hoodies. You're going HOM again, I agree. For the manufacturing, M for manufacturing. And this is the fabric now. Do I know how much fabric each hoodie needs? I hope so. If I don't think I'm doing all that well at controlling the costs in my business. So I should know exactly how much hoodie is associated with how much fabric. So I would go with the direct cost of $260. So HOM 260. Excellent. Well done, Zuzana. And well done, everybody. So there we go. 3 tasks done in the assessment. So tasks 1, 2, and 3. I thought I was hoping I'd do task 1, 2, and 3, and I thought I might be a bit ambitious. So I thought I set the scene with 1 and 2, and then we did get time to do number 3 as well. So that's just excellent, because the more that we can do, the more we're going to have time for in our second week. So I hope you found that useful. Great revision there over some of those initial topics. Costing, putting together the cost of the unit, the cost behaviour was tested, coding we revised there. So yeah, practice some more task 1s and 2s and 3s from the materials that you've got, be it ours or maybe the AAT materials, or maybe something that your tuition provider has given you. As many tasks of that nature as you can, just to reinforce that knowledge. And then when I see you again, I think we'll actually just continue in the order that we've already started here. So we will come back when I see you again on Thursday, and we'll have a look at task number 4. Task number 4 is another task which deals with cost behaviour, also deals with overhead absorption rates again. So it's nice that we've got to do one this evening, then we get to see it again in a slightly different examinable form when I see you again next time. So it will be task 4, and we'll also have a look at task number 5, which is looking at manufacturing accounts. Okay, I'm going to stop the recording, but if you do have any questions, feel free to hang around and I will deal with those now. Otherwise, for the benefit of everybody listening at home, thank you so much for joining and for listening. And yeah, keep going till you get to the next recording. Thank you.